A video game company failing to secure a patent for a game mechanic is always a massive W in my book. I don't believe that video game companies should be allowed to secure patents for game mechanics, because it'd be like if a painter secured patents for certain brushstrokes, or if a musician secured patents for certain chord progressions or musical techniques, if writers secured patents for certain literary techniques and devices, if filmmakers secured patents for certain cinematic techniques and certain kinds of cinematography, so on and so forth. We're talking about the building blocks through which you can create unique artistic expressions, not the unique artistic expression itself. A company securing patents for game mechanics, all that does is prevent other artists to essentially be able to put their own spin on certain kinds of game mechanics and make them their own. And I think anyone who tries to secure patents for game mechanics is a hypocrite, because they themselves, no doubt, have used game mechanics from games past that they took inspiration from, game mechanics that were established and originated by a seminal game, but that game mechanic has since evolved because so many new spins have been put upon it, or there have been so many evolutions of that game mechanic. Which is why when I heard that one of Nintendo's recent game mechanic patents was rejected, I felt quite overjoyed, because hopefully this will set a precedent. Now, today's story also ties back to Palworld, the highly successful monster catching game that's also a survival game and a farming game that came out back in January of 2024. It is still in early access, but it's become massively popular in large part because it does take inspiration from Pokemon. Now, some of their PAL designs, many would argue, look similar enough to certain Pokemon that many expected that Nintendo would pursue action, and they did indeed, but not in the way that people expected. On September 19th, 2024, Nintendo announced that they were suing Pocket Pair, the developers of Palworld, because they believe that the game infringes multiple patent rights. Because Nintendo knows that trying to prove design similarities is a steeper uphill legal battle, they decided to abuse essentially game mechanic patents by insisting that Palworld steals from Pokemon game mechanics, which makes absolutely no sense when you consider that Palworld as a video game is a much different kind of game compared to Pokemon. Instead of legally arguing that designs are too similar, they're arguing that the game mechanics are too similar to Nintendo's own patents, which many would agree is straight up BS. From a gameplay standpoint, you cannot confuse Palworld with Pokemon. Bloomberg put it best here: Nintendo filing this lawsuit for patent infringement, not copyright violation, means that it has given up making the case that Palworld's characters are similar to Pokemon's, but it shows Nintendo has more ways to stop games it doesn't like. The company owns a lot of patents related to basic game mechanics that are used in many titles available today. Nintendo isn't using patents to protect itself. It feels like they're abusing patents to take down any games that they don't like or who they deem to have, certain similarities, and not arguing in the right way. And so the fear is that with new patents that Nintendo might be granted, that they will end up abusing those as well, such as the one here that Nintendo was granted on September 2nd, 2025 by the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which relates to the gameplay mechanic of summoning a character and letting it fight another. Now, it's worth noting that this patent is a very specific version of that mechanic, where it has to adhere to all of the following criteria that essentially describes Pokemon's auto battle system. In theory, just being able to summon a monster and being able to battle with it does not adhere to the specific criteria here, because this very specifically describes exactly the way auto battle works in Pokemon. Here's games journalist Kaylee Plack saying that it's very clearly describing auto battle as it appears in Scarlet and Violet, not like all monster summoning. She later released an article titled, "No, Nintendo Pokemon did not patent summoning characters and making them battle in its entirety, just a very specific version of it." It is further detailed here that the patent outlines the process by which, after the player has summoned a sub-character, a game's software would determine whether to initiate a player-controlled battle, an automatic battle with the sub-character, or automatic movement by that same sub-character. Now, despite the specificity of this patent, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't concern game developers. Kaylee Plagg highlights this herself, saying that whether this particular patent could unreasonably restrict the mechanics of other games is in part determined by any given court's interpretation of the patent and the law. Even if on paper it describes a very specific type of monster summoning and being able to battle with it and command it, it doesn't change the fact that in the same way that Nintendo's abusing patents to go after Palworld for the wrong reasons, Nintendo could use this patent to go after any entity who has mechanics that are similar enough. On top of the fact that this is still a game mechanic that other game developers should be allowed to use for their own unique artistic expression, even this game mechanic with this specific criteria is not something that Nintendo should be able to have full ownership and control over, because other developers might want to do their own version of that, and Nintendo's completely restricting that. Now, relevant to today's story is how The Verge highlights how there are two main ways in which one could potentially invalidate this specific patent: by anticipation or obviousness, and by subject matter eligibility. The first of these points, anticipation or obviousness, has to do with whether previous works have used similar mechanics, even if they weren't patented. And so it's something that already exists that Nintendo's trying to patent, therefore it's not really like a unique invention. The Verge spoke to Charles Dwan here, an assistant professor at a law college, and he highlighted how one way you could argue anticipation or obviousness for the patent that the Pokemon Company secured is games like StarCraft, where it has something that resembles Pokemon's auto battle, specifically referring to the attack move command that sees units move to a destination, and along the way, if they encounter an enemy, they will automatically attack them. And so if it can be proved that StarCraft's attack move mechanic meets the criteria that Nintendo is pursuing with their patent with auto battle, because StarCraft came first and already used that invention, Nintendo can't just patent that later on with more recent games and with more recent patents. And then there's a second point and way in which Nintendo's patent could be invalidated: subject matter eligibility, which basically says that you can patent something that is very specifically unique, but you can't patent a really abstract idea. And the idea of commanding subjects to automatically attack things, it was highlighted here how it sounds a lot like ordinary military hierarchies. There would be a pretty good argument that the patent claims are directed to an abstract idea. Now, on April 18th, 2025, news outlet GamesFray reported on how Pocket Pair was defending against Nintendo's patent, and they're arguing that previous games have already done what Nintendo is patenting, the patents that Nintendo is using to sue Pocket Pair. Therefore, this whole case and the patents themselves are invalid. They're using the anticipation or obviousness argument to invalidate Nintendo's lawsuit, arguing that games like Ark, Craftopia, Nintendo's own Zelda, Final Fantasy XIV, etc. have used the game mechanics that Nintendo's patenting before Nintendo patented them. So all that is worth keeping in mind as we delve into the most recent developments surrounding a Nintendo patent that got rejected. Right here we have another GamesFray article from October 29th, 2025, titled "Japan Patent Office Rejects Nintendo Application Relevant to Palworld Dispute, Cites Games Like Ark as Prior Art After Third-Party Submission." Prior to this article, Nintendo continued to argue that the invalidity arguments on the part of Pocket Pair are in itself not valid, even going as far as claiming that mods should not count as prior art, which is complete bullshit, and that's a whole other discussion within itself. But basically, the reason Nintendo made that argument is because Palworld brought up that mods, even in the past, have essentially done what Nintendo claims is a unique invention with this patent, and Nintendo's counterargument is that mods don't count as prior art, which I personally think, again, is BS. Because prior art is every publication or comparable disclosure, such as a presentation in front of a sufficiently large number of people, that prior to the priority date of a given patent application and made information available that potentially renders that patent application meritless or an already granted patent invalid, because the claimed invention was not novel as of the priority date, or even if it was novel at the time, lacked an inventive step over what was already public information. So Pocket Pair is saying with mods that have done what Nintendo claims is their patent, that was already public information, therefore the patent doesn't count. But anyway, all of this is tied to Palworld because this specific report involves 3 patents that are involved in the Palworld lawsuit. As IGN describes here from the GamesFray report, 2 are related to monster capture and release, and 1 is related to writing characters. Yes, Nintendo's even patenting game mechanics related to mounts, specifically smooth switching between mounts, which again, I believe should not be allowed because that kind of mechanic should be allowed to be used by all game developers for their own unique artistic expressions. But yeah, within this triplet of patents, one of those has actually been rejected. Pending patent application number 2024 03-1879, which relates to monster capturing. And basically what happened was that Japan's patent office argued that what Nintendo's patenting here is similar to what games released prior to this patent already feature within those games, among them being Studio Wildcard's Ark, Capcom's Monster Hunter 4, Pocket Pair's Craftopia, and a Japanese game called Kantai Collection, as well as Pokemon Go, ironically enough. The fact that the patent examiner is actually scrutinizing this patent by looking at other games is actually a pretty big deal. GamesFray reports here that this considerably ups the ante for Nintendo. And while right now all this has no direct impact on the Palworld patent case and the lawsuit, it could down the line. The way GamesFray puts it here is that the non-finally rejected patent application, so this is not a final decision, but it is the current decision that potentially could be reversed if Nintendo makes a compelling enough argument, is a key building block of Nintendo's monster capture patenting strategy that took aim at Palworld after its early 2024 release. It has the same parent application as JP7493117 and is the parent of JP7545191, both of which Nintendo is asserting against Palworld. So the fact that this patent that's being rejected is linked to this trio of patents that is being heavily used in the lawsuit against Palworld could mean that if the patent rejection does become final, then it will set a precedent and it will impact the validity of the other two patents as well. It would strengthen Pocket Pair's invalidity argument of anticipation or obviousness, which argues that other games in the past prior to the patent have used this before. Therefore, it is not a unique idea that Nintendo can patent. That is one of Pocket Pair's primary arguments, that other games like Ark, Craftopia, Zelda, Final Fantasy XIV, etc. have used mechanics that Nintendo's trying to patent. And now we're seeing patent examiners agree with that assertion by also calling out Ark specifically alongside other games like Monster Hunter 4, Pocket Pair's Craftopia, a Japanese browser game named Kantai Collection, Pokemon Go, so on and so forth. So this could be an interesting turn of events if the rejection of this actually goes through and becomes final. But we are not quite there yet. We'll see what happens on that front. But another thing worth noting is that recently Nintendo got hacked and a bunch of their upcoming plans for Pokemon leaked. And what a lot of people noticed is that some of those plans are similar to what Palworld is doing. Among the leaks is an upcoming Pokemon game project that has open world exploration akin to Palworld, creature capture and combat akin to Palworld, survival elements akin to Palworld, and survival is an aspect that Palworld has that Pokemon generally doesn't, alongside aspects like multiplayer and co-op gameplay that's similar to Palworld, and tone and progression that is edgy, post-apocalyptic on Palworld and with guns and ethical dilemmas. And apparently this upcoming Pokemon game is similar in that it is a bit edgier. It's darker aesthetic than mainline Pokemon, with mature themes like resource scarcity and creature exploitation, echoing fan demands unmet by Nintendo. So the fact that this is even in the works at all kind of weakens Nintendo's stand of like, they're copying us, when they themselves are partaking in the copying. And it's not copying, it's just, taking inspiration from game mechanics that came before. So you can build your own game based on those game mechanics while adding a unique spin, while also having unique artistic expression. Like, I think Nintendo should be allowed to take inspiration from Palworld, but also in turn, Palworld and other games in general should be allowed to take inspiration from mechanics established by Nintendo. Because Nintendo itself and all of their recent games have taken a lot of inspirations from titles that came before. You can tell that Nintendo's learned a lot from other games' innovations as far as game mechanics are concerned, but Nintendo puts enough of their own spin on it where you can see it as a unique creation, and you can't confuse Nintendo's games with some of the stuff that they did take inspiration from, and that should be allowed. So it's hypocritical of Nintendo to patent game mechanics and have the ability to sue other game developers for taking inspiration from Nintendo's game mechanics when Nintendo has done exactly the same. But yeah, you can see right here the immense amount of support that Japan's patent office rejecting Nintendo's patent when it comes to like monster capturing and their specific version of that has garnered, with this Twitter post right here reporting on this, garnering 1.6 million views and 31,000 likes in a very short amount of time. And all of the replies here are nothing but celebration of this, because just about everyone is in agreement, in universal agreement, that game mechanics should not be able to be patented, that game developers should continue to be able to take inspiration from each other when it comes to building blocks like game mechanics, because without that, video games wouldn't be where they are today. We wouldn't get the games that we do now. We wouldn't see the evolution of specific genres and certain types of gameplay elements if it wasn't for the fact that developers can take what came before and then like usher forward their own take on it or evolve it in really compelling ways. We wouldn't get Expedition 33 if a company had secured patents for turn-based combat. That's just one of the more recent examples of somebody who loved that genre, who loved those game mechanics, and really put their own spin on it with their own unique artistic expression. It's very clear what they took inspiration from, but it is very much still its own thing. And that's just one of, thousands and tens of thousands of examples. Here's another similar post that reports on one of Nintendo patents getting denied, and this has also garnered 1.3 million views, 23,000 likes, similar range of a lot of interactions of people celebrating that, we're seeing some kind of pushback against game companies like Nintendo patenting stuff that are vague enough ideas or have been done before in other games. And also just the very notion of patenting game mechanics is something that the gaming community widely and near universally rejects. Because there's an understanding that the reason why some of the best games are as good as they are right now is because of everything that came before, because we keep building on what came before. But yeah, some really interesting new developments that might set the groundwork for Nintendo not fully being able to get away with their patents. And hopefully this will start a conversation and some kind of initiative where these game mechanic patents can be scrutinized. It is worth highlighting that this rejection of Nintendo's patent isn't final. Nintendo can counter-argue, and who knows, maybe Japan's patent office will change their mind. I really hope that they don't, because I think the argument surrounding past games having done similar things is a strong one. And even forgetting the letter of the law, I think just from a pure moral standpoint, just from a pure ethics standpoint, any game company patenting game mechanics is just plain and simply wrong. All that does is stifle creativity. It is all ultimately bad for the games industry and for the freedom of game development if this kind of stuff becomes more normalized. So I'm personally hoping that Nintendo cannot get away with this one, but I suppose only time will tell. This is at least some kind of positive development on that front. But that's my take. I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on the most recent developments surrounding Nintendo's patents, and one of them getting rejected, and that potentially causing a chain reaction if it fully goes through. In the comments below, share your thoughts, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.